welcome to the Kim Iverson Show. Thank you guys so much for being here. You might have noticed that we rolled this show out today. It's noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, rather than last week. We said we were moving the show to 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern from our previous time slot, which was at night. But we are thinking we're gonna shift it to noon Pacific. We're just gonna add an hour for our own production needs, just to kind of help us get the show out, to not be so rushed in the morning. So new time slot. I know I just changed it on you, but it was only for 1 week. So we can manage. And it's just 1 hour, just shifting it. So now the show is going to be on at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. That is the time. I think that's final. I could always change my mind. You're going to get a show every day, regardless, no matter which time I put it out. But we're going to aim for this for noon and 3 p.m. So 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. We're going to do it this way this week, and we'll see how it goes. And if we change our mind, we'll let you know. Got a great show for you. The International Court of Justice, the UN's International Court of Justice, did release the ruling in the case of South Africa versus Israel in the accusation that South Africa has against Israel of genocide against the Palestinians, against the people in Gaza. We're going to break that down. There's been a lot of people on both sides saying it's a win. You got all these Israeli voices saying it's a win for Israel, and people on the Palestinian side saying it's a win for Palestine. But a lot of Palestinian voices, a lot of people who are really prominent journalists, a lot of people are saying it's a loss for Palestine. So we're going to break that down. Also, we're going to transition from Palestine to Palestine. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. We have Savage Joy Marie joining us. She has been an activist, journalist, on the ground, covering the story, talking to the people, doing fundraisers. She's doing another fundraiser to help the people. So we're going to be talking to her about the latest updates as we approach the 1-year anniversary of that Norfolk Southern train derailment. So that is coming up later on in the show after we break down this ICJ ruling. I personally think the ICJ ruling is a giant win for Palestinians. I think it's a huge loss for Israel. And I'm going to get into why exactly I think that the people are upset about the ceasefire, about how there wasn't a call for a ceasefire. I think when we read through this document together, when we go through it a bit more, you'll understand that part doesn't actually matter. They essentially called for that. This is a giant win. But first, I want to get to some of our sponsors. Field of Greens. You guys know I love this stuff. It is a fine powder made from dehydrated whole fruits and vegetables that are carefully selected to give you the most nutrients in your diet possible. All you do is you take a scoop of this powder, you mix it into your ice water or your iced tea, and it actually tastes really delicious. It's an easy way to get all of your fruits and vegetables into your diet. Now, personally, I really love the lemon lime flavor, but they do have other flavors if you're into that, like mixed berry. They also have an energy version that'll give you a little boost if you want that before your workout or just instead of your coffee for the day. They also have a natural flavor, which I find tastes best if you mix it with iced tea, but that's just me. You can also mix this into salad dressings, bake it into brownies, get really creative with it because it is a real fine powder. And there's, I'm sure, a lot of ways you can sneak in all those fruits and vegetables into your kids' diet. And it's a really great and easy way to do so. So head to fieldofgreens.com, use the promo code Kim, and get 15% off of your first order. Again, it's fieldofgreens.com, promo code Kim, to get 15% off your first order. Okay, let's break down this ICJ ruling. People were waiting for this with bated breath, wondering what was the court going to decide. I am surprised, to be honest, that they ruled the way that they did, that they actually said that it is plausible that Israel is committing a genocide. I'm surprised by that because the UN is heavily funded by the United States. In fact, the top 5 funders of the United Nations, I believe, is the United States, the UK, Germany, Japan is one of them. And then I'm the 5th one is slipping my mind, but right there, of those top 4 that I mentioned, of the top 5, the United States and the UK and Germany have been heavily, heavily pro-Israel. And these are the biggest funders to the United Nations. So I thought that the judges would come out with this sort of like, well, it's maybe Israel's committing a genocide. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. We don't really know, but it's not really this case. We can't really take it up because South Africa doesn't really have any standing to be bringing this case forward. They're not the ones who are having a genocide committed against them. They don't really have a beef with Israel. So we're just going to throw this out on a technicality, essentially. And, maybe there's something going on, maybe there isn't, but we don't have to decide on that. That's what I sort of assumed that this panel of judges would do. That would be the easiest thing for them to do. The public would be really angry about it, but court cases get thrown out on technicalities all the time, and it would keep their donors happy, which are the United States, the UK, and Germany. But they didn't do that. They instead actually ruled that it is plausible that Israel is committing a genocide, and then they went further and made their provisions of what needs to happen based on the court that based on the law. So we're going to break this down a little bit by bit. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to go over, we are going to go over what South Africa demanded, what Israel demanded, and then what the court ultimately decided. But first, the court had to decide when it started off, this ruling is 26 pages long. The court had to decide whether or not this case could even be in front of the court at all. And this is why I thought it would get thrown out, that they would say, yeah, it can't be here. So they spent quite a bit of time in this document basically breaking down whether or not they had jurisdiction. They had to first decide if there was even a dispute between the two nations. And then they secondly had to decide if there is a dispute, do they even have jurisdiction? So is there a dispute? According to the rules of the court, it says, quote, in order for a dispute to exist, it must be shown that the claim of one party is positively opposed by the other, and the two sides must hold clearly opposite views. So in order for there to be a dispute, you got to show that there's two countries, they're going head to head, they're against one another, and they clearly have opposite viewpoints. I should actually back up for just a second and let me go over, before we go into this document more, let me actually go over some of what people are saying in social media so that we can kind of show, I can kind of break down why I don't agree with any of these people at all on either side of this. So you've got people who are very big pro-Palestinian journalists, other voices saying that this was a loss. And then you had a lot of big prominent pro-Israel voices saying this was a win for Israel. And they're all wrong. And we're going to go over this and explain why they're wrong. But let's start off with the pro-Palestinian side, who believe that this ruling was crap because the ICJ did not call for a ceasefire from their viewpoint. But I'm going to break down why that is not actually correct. So here's Ahmed Al-Nouk. He is he's a Palestinian journalist based in London. He wrote, ICJ to Israel, kill the Palestinians, but slowly. You still have another month. No ceasefire. Feed the Palestinians before you kill them. So this tweet went viral. A lot of people sharing this one. Motaz, so this is Aziza Motaz. He is grew in popularity during this time. He's been in Gaza, documenting the atrocities, grew a massive, massive following in that time. He's got 1 million followers now on Twitter when he started off with only a couple thousand. He says, F the ICJ and the whole world governments. We lost our trust in every decision maker in the world. Ceasefire now. So very angry that the ICJ did not order a ceasefire. Edward Snowden wrote, the reason the ICJ didn't order an Israeli ceasefire in the Palestinian genocide case is not for lack of evidence, in my opinion, but for fear that they could not enforce the ruling. For the ICJ to function, the US-EU must first stop serving as an accessory to the crime. Okay. Now let's go to the pro-Israel voices who said, oh, no, this is a big win for Israel. Here's Avi Meir, also a big former editor-in-chief for the Jerusalem Post. Says Israel's detractors are scrambling to spin the International Court of Justice's decision as somehow bad for Israel's military campaign against Hamas, but it's no use. The court pointedly refrained from calling for a halt to Israel's military effort, a significant win for Israel. And then here's Khalid Hassan, who is a Islamist terrorism researcher, and he wrote, Mazel Tov, I'm Israel, which is the people of Israel live. Today was a win for the good guys. Anyone who thinks otherwise, please bear this in mind. The ICJ rejected South Africa's request to enforce a ceasefire on Israel, a recognition of our right to defend ourselves. The ICJ didn't suggest that Israel is committing genocide. The ICJ merely requested that Israel doesn't commit genocide, allow humanitarian aid in, essentially everything Israel's doing anyway, The ruling changes absolutely nothing on the battlefield. The war goes on, and we continue to fight for the survival and future of Israel. Baruch Hashem, which means like glory to God or God bless, something like that. Okay, they're all wrong. I'm going to break down exactly why they're all wrong. So starting off with, so basically we just went through that the court had to decide whether or not the court even had this, if this case was in their jurisdiction. So they have to prove that there's a dispute that exists between two parties. They have to prove that the two sides have opposite views. And they also, because South Africa is accusing Israel of genocide, the court also has to decide whether or not the acts Israel is committing could possibly be genocide. Now, the court said that at this stage, it cannot rule for certain acts of genocide are being committed. That is not for this stage. It doesn't mean that the judges don't think that there is genocide being committed for certain. That is just not what this court hearing was for. This is not what this ruling is for. So that is for the later stage. They said right now it only has to decide if it's plausible. That's it. So they said, quote, at the present stage of the proceedings, the court is not required to ascertain whether any violations of Israel's obligations under the Genocide Convention have occurred. Such a finding could be made by the court only at the stage of the examination of the merits of the present case. At the stage of making an order on a request for the indication of provisional measures, the court's task is to establish whether the acts and omissions complained by the applicant appear to be capable of falling within the provisions of the Genocide Convention in the court's view. So they're saying, look, all we have to do is decide whether or not this appears to be a genocide. We don't have to say it is. We just have to say it kind of looks like it. You know, it's plausible, in order for us to then do these provisional rulings saying that, hey, we think in the meantime you have to do this, this, and this, sort of like an injunction. And then they go on to say, in the court's view, at least some of the acts and omissions. So at least some. So it could be all, but they're saying at least some. They're not saying all because it could be, but it also might not be. Maybe there's one that isn't. So they're saying at least some of the acts and omissions alleged by South Africa to have been committed by Israel in Gaza appear to be capable of falling within the provisions of the convention. So it does look like at least some of the things you're doing look like they're genocide. That's what the court said. Now, Israel tried to claim that there was no dispute between the two parties and that this case should be thrown out. They said that South Africa, basically they said, South Africa didn't talk to us. We didn't know they were mad. We didn't know that they had a problem with us. They didn't come work it out with us. They didn't come talk to us. They didn't try to reach out. They just kind of took us to court. We didn't even have a chance. So this shouldn't even be here because South Africa should have come to us first. That was what Israel argued. They said we should work this out privately. The court said, no, come on now. South Africa made it really, really clear that they were mad at you. They made public statements numerous times. They accused you at the UN General Assembly, at the UN Security Council. They accused you all the time. So, nah, you knew. This isn't a surprise. Now, some people also wonder how South Africa could bring the case to court to begin with because they're not the ones being genocided. The Gazans are. And the court actually addresses that in this document as well and says that they basically say that since both Israel and South Africa are signatories on the conventions, on the genocide conventions, basically anybody who's a signatory, any nation who's a signatory can bring a beef against another nation that is breaking one of the conventions, because when they break the convention and they're not held accountable, it harms the whole group. It harms all of them. So every individual signatory is harmed when one breaks the rules and just gets away with it. So they say that's just it kind of null and voids the whole thing. So they said because they both signed it, then South Africa actually is a victim if it turns out that Israel's breaking these rules that South Africa and Israel both signed on to. So they said, so yeah, South Africa can, because they're also harmed by this, so sure. So basically the court did establish that, yes, there's a dispute between these two people. They said, you knew about it. They told you. You guys have very opposite views. They think you're doing genocide. You don't. And yeah, this all falls. It's fine for South Africa to bring this case in front of us. So basically the two things that Israel asked for, they only asked for two things. They asked for the whole court case to be thrown out, and they asked for it to be taken off the general list. The court said no and no. So Israel lost right there. Everything Israel asked for, out the window. No and no. You lose. Now, let's go over what South Africa asked for. And we're going to go over what the ICJ, how they ruled. The first thing that South Africa asked for was for the state of Israel to immediately suspend its military operations in and against Gaza. Now, the ICJ did not suspend military operations in and against Gaza. That is not what they ended up doing. And that is what the beef is with all these people saying that there's no ceasefire. Now, let me make something very clear. Military operations and ceasefire and live fire military operation is not the only type of military operation that exists. Plenty of other military operations that don't include live fire. So you can have a ceasefire without halting your military operations, and you can continue your military operations without firing a single shot. So for example, flooding the tunnels, not that it's a bad thing. There's a myriad of reasons of why that's a bad thing to do, but nonetheless, you could do that without live fire. So you don't have to have a ceasefire to somehow disable the tunnel network. You don't have a ceasefire, for example, to send in a group of special ops to capture the leaders of Hamas, take them out of Gaza, and hold them accountable in trial. You can do that. That's a military operation. You're going to go in, you're going to capture the people. A military operation is to go a hostage rescue operation. That's a military operation. You could do a military operation. There's a whole host of military operations that you could do that don't include warfare, that don't include live ammunition, dropping bombs, warfare. So the ICJ did not call for a cease. So they didn't call for an end of its military operations in Gaza. That's what they didn't call for. To say that they didn't call for a ceasefire, we're going to get into this. They did say you can't kill anybody. That would essentially be a ceasefire. So South Africa asked for an immediate suspension of its military operations in Gaza. That is something that the court did not do. They said you can continue military operations, you just can't continue a genocide, and you can't kill anybody. So the ICJ, the way they ruled, let me just get to the right page here. They took votes. We're going to actually go through the voting of how they voted one by one on provision by provision. It's actually quite interesting. There was one judge from Uganda who voted against everything. Israel didn't even vote against everything, but she did. The country of Uganda has now since pretty much disowned her. They've come out saying she doesn't represent the government. She doesn't represent our sentiments. We don't know what the hell. She went rogue. So the government of Uganda is pretty upset about it. So here's what the ICJ, this is the ruling here. By a vote of 15-2, so there were 17 judges on the panel. 2 of the judges are judges that were each country's allowed, if there is no judge on the panel from their country, they're allowed to bring in a judge. So South Africa was able to bring in a judge, and Israel was allowed to bring in a judge. So it was a 17-judge panel. By a vote of 15-2, the state of Israel, in accordance with its obligations under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in relation to Palestinians in Gaza, take all measures within its power to prevent the commission of all acts within the scope of Article 2 of this convention, in particular, A, killing members of the group. Nothing else. That's what it says. Killing members of the group. They didn't say except for civilians that are being used as human shields, except for the people who happen to be trapped in the tunnels as you gas them, or except for there's no except for. They said you cannot kill members of the group being Palestinians. Can't kill Palestinians. Now, I don't know how you do that without a ceasefire. B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. So maybe you don't kill them, you want to maim them, shoot their eye out, shoot off a limb. Not allowed to do that either. C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. And D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. So those are the things you're not allowed to do. Now, I don't know how you do those things without a ceasefire. I really don't. How do you not kill members of the group? How do you not cause serious bodily harm or mental harm to members of the group? I mean, if you're taking shelter and you're looking up and you're seeing hearing bombs being dropped all around you, that's mental harm. And they're saying you can't do that anymore. So you can't drop bombs. You can't kill people. You can't deliberately inflict on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. So even a little bit of it. So you can't blow up all these buildings anymore. So I don't know how you do that without a ceasefire. You can have a military operation without doing any of those things. Like I said, a hostage rescue operation. You could have a extraction of those hostages, capturing of the leaders of Hamas, taking them back to Israel to hold them accountable for the October 7th crimes. You could dismantle, military infrastructure that if you can find it, such as tunnels themselves, right? There's a lot of things that you could do that are military operations that do not include killing members of the group. Effectively, a ceasefire, but you can still do other military operations. Again, South Africa didn't ask for a ceasefire. Remember, what South Africa asked for was for the state to immediately suspend its military operations. The judges refused to do that because of all the things I mentioned. Not only that, but how could the judges say no more military operations when a military operation includes trying to rescue your own hostages? Of course, Israel should be allowed to try to rescue their hostages. They're not any good at it. They've killed more than they've helped, but they should be allowed to try. Nobody should be telling them, no, you cannot do that. You should be allowed to go and capture people who committed crimes against your country and cart them off to your courts and hold them accountable. You should absolutely be allowed to do that. That's not genocide. And what the ICJ has to rule on is genocide. What South Africa is accusing Israel of is genocide. You can have war even without genocide. So how could the ICJ say you can't have war? Well, you can have a war, you just can't genocide during that war. Or you can have a military operation, you just can't kill people. So it's quite significant that the ICJ ruled you can't kill any members of the group. You can't kill anybody. I mean, that is what they said. They didn't say, go ahead and feed them before you kill them, or go ahead and kill them, but kill them slowly, or you have a month to keep killing them. They said, stop killing members of the group. Period. Rescue your hostages, capture the leaders and hold them accountable. Stop killing people. Here's some other votes by 15-2, and the two are Judge Sebutinde. I'm sorry if I'm saying that. Let me see. I practiced how to say this. Sebutinde. So it's Judge Sebutinde and Judge Barak, who's from Israel. Sebutinde is from Uganda. Voted against that by a vote of 15-2. Also, Sebutinde and Barak, they voted against. The state of Israel shall ensure with immediate effect that its military does not commit any of the acts described in the point above, which is don't kill any members of the group, don't cause any bodily harm, don't inflict any terrible conditions meant to bring about destruction of their lives. Don't do any of that. Make sure your military doesn't do any of that. Okay? By a vote of 16-1, the state of Israel shall take all measures within its power to prevent and punish the direct and public incitement to commit genocide in relation to members of the Palestinian group in the Gaza Strip. So you need to punish the people who are calling for genocide. One person said that was, nah. And that wasn't the Israeli judge. The Israeli judge says, yeah, you know what? You should punish people calling for genocide. He said, my country should punish people calling for genocide. But it was Judge Sebutinde who said, nah, it's okay. Go ahead. The Ugandan judge, also a vote of 16-1, with the Israeli judge going with the majority and the Ugandan judge just saying, nah. The state of Israel shall take immediate and effective measures to enable the provision of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance to address the adverse conditions of life faced by Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Who in the hell votes against that? The Ugandan judge. Not even the Israeli judge voted against that. The Israeli judge was like, yeah, right. They should actually try to get all the humanitarian assistance in there. And she's like, go ahead, call for genocide. Don't give them any aid. Now, again, Uganda has completely, they're like distanced themselves from this judge. They're really angry. She's the first Black woman to be appointed to a judgeship on the UN ICJ. They were really proud of her. And now they're like, what in the world has happened to this judge? Maybe this judge has a real staunch bias against Muslims, against Arab people. Like, who knows? Very bizarre. Okay, 15-2. So again, it was Judge Sebetu Dinde from Uganda and the Israeli judge voting against this. The state of Israel shall take effective measures to prevent the destruction and ensure the preservation of evidence related to allegations of acts within the scope of Article 2 and Article 3 of the Convention in the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide against members of the Palestinian group in the Gaza Strip. So, nah, go ahead, destroy the evidence, says Judge Sebetu Dinde and the Israeli Judge Barak. Another by 15-2, the state of Israel shall submit a report to the court on all measures taken to give effect to this order within 1 month as from the date of October. So in 1 month, provide a report of everything you've done to comply. And again, those two judges, Sebetunde and Barak, said, nah, we're not going to do that. We don't think that we should have to do that. We don't think Israel should have to do that. Very bizarre for this Ugandan judge to even go against the Israeli judge on two of the provisions of humanitarian aid and calls and like verbal calls for genocide from Israeli public figures and politicians. Very, very bizarre. And, I mean, it's not laughing matter because this is a serious thing. And this Uganda, I mean, but it is bizarre. I mean, it's just ultra, ultra bizarre. So these are pretty much all the things that South Africa asked for. When you look at the things South Africa asked for, they said that they wanted the state of Israel to immediately suspend its military operations. That was not granted. Again, military operations are different than live fire. They asked for the state of Israel shall ensure that any military or irregular armed units also don't do any military operations. And the judges did not give them that. They said that they wanted the Palestinian people, they wanted Israel to take all measures to prevent genocide. The judges did agree to that. South Africa says they need to stop killing members of the group. They need to stop causing serious bodily harm, inflicting conditions on the group to bring about its physical destruction in whole and part. Also, measures intended to prevent births. That was all granted. The judges agreed. They gave those exactly. South Africa also asked for the state of Israel to desist from expelling people from their homes. They need to make sure that they have access to adequate food and water, access to humanitarian assistance, access to fuel, shelter. All of that was granted by the ICJ judges. They also said that they need to be punishing the people who engage in direct and public incitement to commit genocide or conspiracy to commit genocide. The judges granted this. The state of Israel shall take effective measures to prevent the destruction and the preservation of evidence related to the allegations. The judges granted that. They also said that they need to report to the court the measures taken, and the judges granted that. So the judges granted everything the South Africans asked for. And remember, the judges did not give Israel the two things it asked for. It gave the South Africans everything it asked for except for suspending military operations. And again, I just cannot stress enough that that is very different. Military operations that's a wide umbrella, big umbrella, covers a lot of different types of operations. Many, many, many military operations are not warfare. There are other types of operations. It would have been totally outside of the purview of the court to order the Israelis to cease all military operations. That includes a lot of things. That would have been way outside of the jurisdiction of the ICJ, in my opinion. It would have been totally uncalled for. It would have been a wrong decision in actuality, because Israel absolutely should have the right to have a military operation to rescue their hostages. and to capture the leaders of Hamas who are responsible for October 7th. They have every right to do that. They have every right to go after the people who should be held responsible for October 7th. They have the right to do that. And it would have been totally outside of what's even fair, just, and right for the ICJ to say you can't do that. So this was the correct ruling, and it is not antithetical to a ceasefire. In fact, it pretty much supports it. They said don't kill any more members of the group and don't cause any more seriously bodily harm or mental harm. The only way you can do that is a ceasefire. You can do all these other things, rescue your hostages, hold Hamas accountable. You can't go after all the people. You can't be conducting all this warfare. So this was a huge, huge win for South Africa. Really not, who cares about South Africa? Honestly, this is a huge win for the Palestinian people, a huge win for the Gazans. This report says stop killing them, stop harming them, stop displacing them, stop blowing up all their stuff. You have to stop. You have to stop all of that. You are possibly committing a genocide. This court ruling is not to say you are committing a genocide. That also would have been outside of the scope of what is normal and what would have been accurate. That would have been viewed as sort of like bench activism. If they said you are committing a genocide, because that's not what this court hearing was for. The court hearing was specific. It was for the court to determine if it's plausible Israel's committing a genocide, and if so, then to put forward some injunctions on them, some measures, impose on them some measures that they have to take in order to halt their activities. They decide if they've committed a genocide at a later date. In my view, the way that this hearing went, or the way that this ruling went, they will likely say it was a genocide. And let me tell you why. They spent several pages in this 26-page document citing all the crap Israel's doing to the Gazans. Measure after measure. I mean, they said that, here's what you're not allowed to do. According to the scope of Article 2 of the Convention, the intent must be, in order for it to fall within the scope of Article 2, so if you committed a genocide, it's got to be this. The intent must be to destroy at least a substantial part of the particular group that is demanded by the very nature of the crime of genocide, since the object and purpose of the convention as a whole is to prevent the intentional destruction of groups. The part targeted must be significant enough to have an impact on the group as a whole. Okay, so that's what a genocide is, according to their convention. And they said that, so it's got to be a group of people that you can identify. And so they said the Palestinians are a distinct national, ethnical, and racial religious group. So this is a group that they can identify. They then went on to cite all of the things that Israel's doing. They were saying that the court takes note in this regard. The statement made by the United Nations Under Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, Gaza has become a place of death and despair. Families are sleeping in the open as temperatures plummet. Areas where civilians were told to relocate for their safety have come under bombardment. Medical facilities are under relentless attack. The few hospitals that are partially functional are overwhelmed with trauma cases, critically short of all supplies, and inundated by desperate people seeking safety. A public health disaster is unfolding. Infectious diseases are spread in overcrowded shelters as sewers spill over. Some 180 Palestinian women are giving birth daily amidst this chaos. People are facing the highest levels of food insecurity ever recorded. Famine is around the corner. For children in particular, the past 12 weeks have been traumatic. No food, no water, no school. Nothing but terrifying sounds of war day in and day out. Gaza has simply become uninhabitable. Its people are witnessing daily threats to their very existence while the world watches on. They go on in these court documents to say, following a mission to North Gaza, the World Health Organization reported that as of December 21st, an unprecedented 93% of the population in Gaza is facing crisis levels of hunger, with insufficient food and high levels of malnutrition. At least 1 in 4 households are facing catastrophic conditions, experiencing an extreme lack of food and starvation, and having resorted to selling off their possessions and other extreme measures to afford a simple meal. Starvation, destitution, and death are evident. So the court further notes, the statements issued by the Commissioner General of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Near East It has been 100 days since the devastating war started, killing and displacing people in Gaza. Following the horrific attacks that Hamas and other groups carried out against the people in Israel, it has been 100 days of ordeal and anxiety for hostages and their families. I'm going to skip forward a little bit. They go on to talk about the statements that were made by Israelis, saying that this is the defense minister of Israel saying, I have released all restraints. You saw what we were fighting against. We are fighting human animals. This is the ISIS of Gaza. This is what we are fighting against. Gaza won't return to what it was before. There will be no Hamas. We will eliminate everything. If it doesn't take one day, it'll take a week. It will take weeks or even months. We will reach all places. They said the president of Israel stated, we are operating militarily according to the rules of international law. Unequivocally, it is an entire nation out there that is responsible. It is not true, this rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved. It is absolutely not true. They could have risen up. They could have fought against the evil regime which took over Gaza and coup d'etat. But we are at war. We are at war. We are at war. We are defending our homes. We are protecting our homes. That's the truth. And when a nation protects its home, it fights. And we will fight until we break their backbone. They also said the Minister of Energy and Infrastructure of Israel stated on X, we will fight the terrorist organization Hamas and destroy it. All the civilian population in Gaza is ordered to leave immediately. We will win. They will not receive a drop of water or a single battery until they leave the world. Not just leave the area, leave the world. That's genocide. So the court goes on and cites all of these horrific conditions in Gaza, the horrific statements made by the Israeli government members. These are not just people, journalists or social media influencers on X. These are government officials, the president of Israel, the defense minister of Israel, the energy and infrastructure minister of Israel. So they said, in the court's view, the facts and circumstances mentioned above are sufficient to conclude that at least some of the rights claimed by South Africa and for which it is seeking protection are plausible. This is the case with respect to the right of Palestinians in Gaza to be protected from acts of genocide and related prohibited acts identified in Article 3, and the right of South Africa to seek Israel's compliance with the latter's obligations under the convention. So that's how South Africa is able to take Israel. It's like they're saying, look, you have to comply. We all had to sign this. We all have to comply, and so do you. So that is what this hearing, the fact that they cited all of this stuff, there's plenty of evidence, there's mounting evidence. When they go to court, eventually, because that's what's going to happen now, the next step is for them to go to court. It'll take a really long time for them to get through it. But when they present all the evidence, it's very possible that the court decides that Israel has committed some acts of genocide, if not a lot of acts of genocide. And that in and of itself is going to be a stain. Israel's now stained forever. That's just the bottom line. Israel is now stained forever. It is now known as a country that attempted to commit, if not has committed or will continue to commit, a genocide. And now they're on the list of there's a few nations, Turkey, Germany, Israel will now join the ranks of these countries that are known for having committed a genocide, atrocities against a group of people. That'll be on them forever. They're no longer the victims, completely innocent all the time. We're the innocent ones. We're the good guys. They've lost that. They've lost their moral standing. They've gotten out of control. And you know what? The world is at fault for this. It's not just Israel. It's the world that is very much complicit in this whole thing for allowing Israel to continue playing the victim card decade after decade after decade, for believing that, for turning a blind eye, for feeling so guilty about the Holocaust that they say, well, how could you possibly do anything wrong? I mean, look what happened to you at one point. It was so atrocious that you therefore are just always good. You know, you're the victim. You're always the victim, and the victim is never the bad guy. You're the damsel in distress in a way, and how could you ever do anything wrong? And just turning a blind eye to the mounting evidence that has been there for years and years and years and years. There has been evidence for decades of Israel's treatment of the Palestinians, and it was ignored because people had a soft spot for Israel, for Jews, and they played on that, and they took advantage of that. And when people were turning a blind eye, they got worse and worse and worse and worse because they were getting away with it, to where it led to a attempted genocide, is what we're watching right now in real time. And You know, if the U.S. government, Biden wants to be a friend to Israel, all these people want to be the friend to Israel. To be a friend to Israel right now is to stop them from these atrocities. Stop them from don't let them get out of control like this. Limit it, halt it, stop funding it. Tell them you cannot do this. You have to integrate with these people. You all have to live together, share the land with equal rights, equal human, equal human rights, and equal community rights, equal rights for the group, not just for individuals. You have to stop a genocide. I mean, that's ultimately the world failed. The world failed the Palestinian people. The Israelis obviously have committed atrocious crimes against the Palestinian people while the world stood there and watched. And that's just as bad. Everybody always thinks, what would I have done had I been alive during World War II? Well, look at yourself now. Where do you stand? Because where you stand now is probably where you would have stood in World War II when the Jews were not viewed as they are today as this group of victim people that are people love the Jews. They say, "Oh, we love Jewish people," and they were the victim. Back then, no, people weren't saying that. They were very against Jews. They looked at them like people look at Arabs today. They're terrorists. They're vile. They're here to harm us. They're dangerous. We can't trust them. They can't integrate. They can't assimilate. Their religion is dangerous. Their viewpoints are dangerous. Their culture is dangerous. That's what they felt about them. And very few people stood up and voiced their opinions to protect the Jewish people. Very few people stood up and said, no, that's wrong. You're wrong. And we will not allow you to continue talking like that. And it led to a genocide. So that's what we're trying to prevent. At least that's what many people are trying to prevent. So where do you stand today? It's a pretty big indicator of where you probably would have stood yesterday. All right, guys, we are going to move on to another Palestine. We're going for Palestine to Palestine. We're going to talk about the disaster in East Palestine, Ohio, the train derailment, the Norfolk Southern train derailment. Savage Joy Marie is going to join us next. She's got a fundraiser going for the people of East Palestine. The 1-year anniversary is February 3rd. So we're going to talk to her about what's the latest, what's the conditions for the people there. What kind of, are they living in a toxic wasteland? We're going to talk to her next. That is coming up. But first, I want to introduce you guys to the Wellness Company, specifically their medical emergency kit. So the Wellness Company is committed to supporting you through whatever the next thing is that gets thrown our way, like Disease X. Talking about Disease X of the WEF, so you might want to be prepared. This was put together. The Wellness Company is formed by doctors like Dr. Peter McCullough. I'm sure you recognize him. He's one of the premier guys during the pandemic, really speaking the truth, getting out there in front of things when people were in a craze. He was out there speaking the truth. He started the Wellness Company to build a parallel healthcare system to bring about change in an otherwise corrupt system. And part of that change is helping you take control of your health. So many people don't trust healthcare right now. In fact, over 40% of Americans say that they would avoid a doctor or a hospital unless it was catastrophic. And that's where the Wellness Company's medical emergency kit comes in. It includes 8 potentially life-saving medications for you to keep on hand in times of need, natural disasters, supply chain shortages, medical emergencies, or an apocalyptic situation. Knock on wood, let's hope that doesn't happen. But you can rest easy knowing that you have emergency antibiotics, antivirals, antiparasitics, all of this on hand to keep you and your family safe. And if you're thinking, well, I'm not a doctor, how would I know what to take? Well, the Wellness Company doctors have you covered. The kit includes a guidebook detailing how, when, and the dosing for each of their medications. And if you're like me and you want to be prepared for the unexpected, then you grab one of these kits by going to twc.health/Kim and use the code Kim to save 15% at checkout. That's twc.health/Kim, code Kim for 15% off. Well, it's almost been 1 year since the disaster in East Palestine, Ohio. Remember the train derailment, the Norfolk Southern train that derailed with a plume of chemicals that just went into the sky. Residents were evacuated. Well, what did the government exactly do for these people? Where are they at today? With us now is Joy Marie Mann. She has been an activist and a journalist following this situation, following the stories of the people on the ground, really been doing great work because the story continues. And as we know, the news cycle moves really, really fast, so people have a tendency to forget what's going on. It was big news for the while that it was in the news, and then people moved on. And yet the people that live there still have to live with this disaster. Joy Marie Mann, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate everything that you're doing for these people and also just the information that you've been gathering. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much for having me back. I really appreciate it.
Let's go over some of the details. Like I said, the news cycle moves fast. People forget. Let's start off with what happened, and what's the update? Why did the train derail? What were the chemicals that spilled? How long? Who was evacuated, and for how long? So let's start off with: do we know why this train derailed?
So the train derailed because of one of the cars was on fire, and we didn't know until video came out. About an hour before the train actually exploded, video from a business showed a train car was sparking. Then about 20 miles out, one of the train cars was on fire. So it's a 2.5 mile long train, and they had two employees. They weren't walking back and forth or anything like that. They were just essentially sitting on each end. They never noticed that one of the train cars was on fire or sparking or anything like that. And then at the point where it just started derailing, likely part of it because it was 2.5 miles long, it just completely exploded, and which is where you see those photos of that, dark plume. So there were dozens of chemicals on it. There are 14 that have been identified as of now. However, we have learned not to trust Norfolk Southern or the EPA as to their findings. So we are relying on activists who are scientists and water testers and such to do independent testing. Two of the chemicals that are cancer causing that we know for a fact were on the train that is now in the air, the soil, and the water, is vinyl chloride and oxaloaxyl acrylate. Um,
Hmm.
Two of which are coming up in blood tests and urine tests, and which the CDC literally said, their doctor, Dr. Chang, stated, we don't have treatments to help what they're testing positive for now. However, we do have treatments to help the cancer once they get it.
Gosh.
So, yeah, even the CDC has acknowledged that they're not surprised that the residents are getting tumors, and one gentleman had to have a double mastectomy because of a rare form of breast cancer with no history in his family. People are very sick in many ways, even 1 year in. So yeah, essentially that's kind of what happened in the beginning, as far as the train exploding and such. So that's where it all started almost 1 year ago.
Do they know why one of the carts was on fire?
They do not. Since it was an hour beforehand, it was sparking. They think that indeed the train was too long, and there was too much weight on
Hmm.
it, because you have a 2.5 mile train, and you have very heavy materials. You have um, tons of chemicals. Each car weighs so much. And then you have, I believe it's 151 cars on that train. And Norfolk Southern is infamous for let's cut costs. Also, we saw in Pittsburgh, which is not that far from East Palestine, we saw in September, or excuse me, it would have been, yes, in September of 2023, or excuse me, 2022, they were protesting because the rail workers had their times cut. The Norfolk Southern trains, they had less than 60 seconds to go over and inspect the safety, the brakes, things like that. So less than a minute to go over this before they said, okay, ready, let's go.
Mm. So, in situations like this, there's like there's a couple of I guess three scenarios. One is there was actual laws or regulations that were skirted, right? So a company could actually just ignore laws or ignore regulation. Second thing could be that the company didn't ignore laws or regulations. There are no laws and regulations for what happened, but a company is just corporate greed, knowing that things are not the safest. It's not breaking a law or anything. They can get away with it, but they maybe know it's not a good idea, but they do it anyway to make more money, for profits. And then the third thing is just, accidents happen. I mean, accidents just genuinely happen. And nobody was trying to do anything nefarious at all. It just, just shit happens. So, which of these three do you think this was? I mean, do we know, were there laws that were broken, or was this just a case of corporate greed, or was this just, too bad? It just happens.
At this point, as far as the train derailing, at that point, not necessarily laws were broken because it was legal for them to have that long of a train and only have two employees. That was legal. The issue becomes, why was that legal? Why is that okay?
Right.
But ultimately, it absolutely comes down to this company is too big to fail. It's a multi-billion-dollar company. This is a very like small town, median income per family is $28,000 prior to the derailment. Now, majority of them have no jobs because the businesses have closed. So it's a very like poor town, very low income and very rural. So it's not surprising that that's where it happened. A lot of times, these multi billion dollar corporations really cut costs and do things at the bare minimum when they know that they're like, if they're going through an upper class place, they're going to make sure that they may go extra out of the way to make sure something like this doesn't happen. But they did the absolute bare minimum.
Well, and also I would imagine certain cities and if you get to the bigger cities, for example, they probably have their own laws and regulations on the train companies telling them this
True.
is what you have to do. And whereas these little tiny areas just don't have anything like that at all.
Right.
Okay. And I think it would be really good to, and maybe you've been looking into, who was lobbying on behalf of Norfolk Southern, who was getting these regulations to where they didn't have to have, more than two employees for a train this long. And there could be, I think we could definitely look into kind of that aspect of it, because there's certainly, these big, if it's too big to fail and they've got a lot of lobbyists and they're greasing up the politicians' pockets, like which politicians' pockets were greased, and
Right.
who's in bed with this company. I think there's a lot of good questions there. But let's get to the people and what's happened with them. So after the train derailed and this plume of chemicals was up there, how many people was the entire town evacuated, or was it like a radius? I thought
They
I remember it being like a 1 mile radius or something.
It was a 1 mile radius, which in a rural place, it's not that many people.
Mhm.
So, like, I know a woman who was at 1.1 miles and was not evacuated. So, yeah, they said everyone within a mile, even though the smell and the plume went on far, far and wide. One of my friends lives in Darlington, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, East Palestine, Ohio borders on Pennsylvania. She's 5.6 miles from the ground zero, and she saw the fire and the
Ugh.
plume. So you have people who are calling their neighbors to say, hey, we should evacuate, because even first responders with all their gear were not going in to knock on doors and tell people to leave because they knew how bad it was, even with all their gear on. So they found out eventually we should leave. They all went, and within 2 days, they said, hey, guess what? You guys can come home. everything's cool, the dust has settled, everyone go home, all good.
Mhm. Okay, so how long were people evacuated for? So,
2 days.
in 2 days, that's 2 days, and they're like, "Go ahead, go back home."
Yeah.
So, what did were these people were the residents provided anything at all besides 2 days evacuation? When they evacuated for 2 days, were they given hotel rooms someplace
No.
else at least, or they were just
They
told to
had to
leave?
pay for them.
Okay, so they were just told to leave, pay for it yourself, that's it.
Yes, and I've learned of situations like this one gentleman and his daughter, they didn't have gas money to leave, and they hid in the attic because they didn't want to get in trouble. So you also had people who said, I don't have money to leave and
Yeah,
automatically just pay for a hotel for 2 nights. Also, there's only one hotel that's even, somewhat close. And it's not like some huge hotel. So rooms filled. I mean, they didn't really have much of a choice.
mhm. Is that the only thing the government gave, the only directive, or did the government give them any sort of stipends, provisions, like, throughout, or was it just two-day evacuation order?
It was a 2-day evacuation.
And that's it. So they didn't give these people anything else at all?
No, at a later point, they did well, they sent them coupons for $10 off a purchase at a local business, very generous. And then at one point they did give stipends for residents who were in the 1 mile radius for $1,000 each, which covered pretty much practically nothing, because you have hotel stays that cost. I mean, I know a resident who's spent over $10,000 on a credit card in hotel stays. So $1,000 meant nothing. They also recently found out they have to pay taxes on
Mhm,
those stipends, as well as any other help they have begged Norfolk Southern for, like when you know uh, they have to pay for things ahead of time and then beg Norfolk Southern to reimburse them. So if they were fortunate enough to have Norfolk Southern reimburse them, they then are being charged on their taxes for
ugh,
those items.
right, right. Okay, so how many people would you say, what percentage of the people that were living within this 1 mile radius decided to not come back after 2 days? They were like, 2 days is not long enough. I'm not going back. Was that the majority of people? Was it half the people? I mean, what can you give us kind of an idea?
It was maybe 10% of the
That
people. A lot of the people there are very, how should I say, like, proud to be American, proud to support their government, and they believed what they were being told. They're being told it's safe to go back. They went back.
and so they went back. So they were told it was safe. So the EPA came, and what sort of testing did the EPA do?
None.
They didn't test at all. They just said it's
No.
safe. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So independent researchers, independent scientists, on the other hand, what have they said?
They said even 1 year, Saturday will be the 1 year. Independent researchers have said that the water, well, all you have to do is look at the creek water, and it's rainbow because of all the pollution. The air is off the charts with toxins. You go there and it smells like chlorine.
Mhm.
So they're they have soil test strips that show just immense amounts of poisonous chemicals. Um, and during the past year, the past few months, really, the EPA has said, "Oh, we're doing testing." Um, and we found out from independent scientists doing their own tests that the EPA was moving a decimal point over. So they would say, oh, this is only 0.3% contaminated, so it's safe. And the independent scientists would say, actually, it's 3.0. So
Oh,
they were
wow.
purposely in the lines, and this is confirmed by a number of people. They were purposely moving over the decimal points. So if we didn't have these amazing volunteer scientists and water testers, we wouldn't even know. We would have
Mhm.
just, oh, okay, well, the studies say it's all right. So cool. Drink your water. It's good now.
Yeah, like they said about Flint, Michigan,
Yeah.
right? The water's safe. Don't worry about it. It's perfectly safe. And then we find out later it's absolutely not safe.
Well, the lead of the EPA in East Palestine worked in Flint for their EPA, coincidentally.
So what if has Norfolk Southern been asked to pay for anything? Have they paid for did they or are they the ones that gave the $1,000 stipend, or was that the government?
That was the government.
So what has Norfolk Southern had to pay for?
Nothing. They have done charitable things such as they're building a $25 million new park on the toxic ground. Um they are doing they had a carnival which had fireworks and gave people PTSD. They had an Easter egg hunt also on contaminated land. So they're doing a lot of PR stuff. They had an office um, in the basement of a church, which was supposedly there to look at receipts and give reimbursements and such. But what they were doing is they would turn people away left and right. If they would come back, they would threaten arrest. They would demean the people so badly that they would cry and get emotional and not want to go back. They would say, "Oh, these people, they're such losers. They just want free stuff." And such. And then people would just say, I can't go back there. It's like I'm being violated all over again." So they did that. They opened up a so-called health clinic, which was supposed to be there much longer, but it was there about a month or two. They had no specialists at all. So it was just basically like, you know, uh, I think it was really just two nurses alternating shifts, saying, what are your symptoms? Oh, well, you got to go to a specialist for that. I'm not really sure. And, one woman went in and said, you know, I think, I'm having issues. Can you do a blood test? And they did the blood test. She tested positive for vinyl chloride. And they said, well, honestly, we don't know what kind of drugs you've done. So we can't be sure that's from the derailment. This is how these
Right.
people have been treated. So, in actuality, what has Norfolk Southern done? Nothing.
Okay. Yeah, it just sounds like this is one of those cases that the people are gonna have to get sick with cancer eventually or have other types of ailments, and then they try to sue the company, right, or the government for
Well,
failure,
yeah,
and then the company and the government play hard, and they come back and they say, "No, you're a drug addict," or you had all these other issues, and so it's not our fault. You can't prove that it came from us in this
right.
derailment, and, I mean, and that just it seems to be that that's how these things go. And that's what people are stuck with, is that if this type of disaster happens where you're living, I mean, just imagine the horrific consequences of that. Of if you I mean, most people cannot just pack up and move towns, move away, start over. It's just not plausible for most people. And so they're
Right.
stuck living in these contaminated areas. And I mean, what would you have liked to have seen instead? What's the alternative for the companies and for the government?
Well, the first thing I would have liked them to do is buy everyone out, buy their homes pre February 3rd, whatever it was worth on February 2nd, buy them out. First thing. Um, Unfortunately, they're multi generational homes. and the toxins get on everything. It's not something you can wash off or wash out. They can't take anything with them, even
Mhm.
furniture, nothing. So also give them some kind of severance or stipend for all of the new stuff they're going to need to buy. So that would be first. Also, 1881A, which gives people Medicare for life, which we saw in Libby, Montana. It's environmental. It's in Obamacare. It's a section explicitly for environmental disasters to give them health care. These people have no health care. They need mental health treatment. They need counselors. They need medications. They have nothing.
Mhm.
So those are the top two things. And if they gave them the outs, and bought their houses from them, which would have been pennies for a multi-billion-dollar corporation, considering the average home there was about $100,000. If they did that, these people wouldn't have half of the health problems they have, because it would have been before they decided to do the controlled burn,
Yeah.
which is the main thing that released the toxins.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds reasonable, honestly. If a big, you just think about it like, like play it out in your mind as a movie. A big a big disaster like this happens, a chemical disaster from a company, and you would think that they would go in and tell everybody to evacuate. We've got
Right.
hotels and places set up for you. This is where you need to go for a while, and yeah, you can't return to this toxic wasteland anymore. Sorry about that. Here's the payouts, and it's going to be still disruptive. It's going to be terrible for everybody, but at least it's better than nothing, and it sounds like they just got nothing. It sounds like they were told, "Oh, you'll be fine, just go back and live on this potential cancer-ridden, toxic wasteland after this huge spill."
Absolutely. And
Yeah, that's
they're still drinking bottled water, cooking in bottled water, and some are even still bathing in bottled water because they're getting chemical burns when they
mhm,
take a shower with their own water. Because a lot of them have pipes underneath their homes that are, under the soil, that's contaminated. So they don't even give them cases of water, let alone anything else. So yeah, nothing has been done. And, a lot of their fear, my fear, everyone's fear is, okay, Saturday's 1 year. If they haven't done anything yet, come on, they're not going to
yeah,
do anything. And that's,
yeah, at
that's
this
the
point.
fear.
Are there any lawsuits pending?
There is a class action pending. Even the residents do not know how many people are on it. Aaron Brockovich is one of the people who is, working as a lawyer. It's, and it takes time. Who knows how long it'll take? Um, they're mainly their main concern is many of them are parents and parents of young children, and they want it expedited because they want to make sure their kids are okay for when,
Yeah,
not if, but when they get sick. And some of the people who are filing lawsuits have said to me, look, I want two things. I want health care, and I want them to agree to pay for any burial costs.
uh,
That's and it's heartbreaking
yeah,
because that's all they want.
right.
And I mean, beyond bare minimum. I'm like, no, you need this. I'm like way more like not even greedy. I'm way more, no, you deserve more justice than that.
Yeah.
But it shows you that's what they're thinking about.
Okay, so Ohio is a one-party consent state, meaning you can record somebody without their knowledge, and it's legal to do that. In some states, both parties have to be aware of the recording, but in Ohio, just one person needs to be aware, which is usually the person doing the recording. So this is why we see a lot of these like kind of Project Veritas,
Right.
secret recordings type things. In some states, you can do that. In some states, you can't. So you recently did something like a Project Veritas style recording. The person did not know they were being recorded. You recorded them for 91 minutes. who was it you recorded, and what did you? And some of this recording is being used in this court case that you're talking about. Is that right?
Yes, and
And
it's all
okay,
on my channel. I released the whole thing
on Savage Joy on your show on
on
your
the
channel.
YouTube. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Who did you record, and what did they say?
So I recorded Mark Durno, who is technically works for Homeland Security, which is the EPA, so-called Environmental Protection Agency. He is the lead in East Palestine. He was the one that worked in Flint that was transferred here. I recorded him saying some things that is just, mind blowing. From things that he admitted he shouldn't have, they shouldn't have let people go home after 2 days. He stated that the EPA says things that are not incorrect or excuse me, are not correct in press conferences. I asked him, why are you fighting people when they say that they are sick? Um, and he said, well, we don't know that it's the chemicals causing this sickness. And I said, what else could it be? Um, and he said, eating meat, garlic. Uh, he takes vitamin B12, so that's why he thinks he's feeling better. Um, just very, and the way these people talk to you is with such hubris. Like he was really trying to convince himself when he was saying this. I was not very nice about some of the stuff he was saying. A person I was with said, have you seen the pictures of the chemical burns on, people's heads? And he literally laughed. And she said, that's not funny. And he goes, I know it's not. And then he laughed again.
Mm,
Um, some of the stuff he says is just absolutely disgusting, and the residents can't believe that he was that transparent. I think one of the things that there's two things that really just stick out to me. Number one, he acknowledged the residents have PTSD. And number two, he stated, I asked him, who has, the hierarchy? Who is it? You're higher up on the totem pole, or Norfolk Southern? And he said, we are. And I
mm.
said, then why aren't you taking a stand? What is going on? And he said, well, we're negotiating with Norfolk Southern. And I was like, hold up, you are higher than them and you are negotiating with them. Why? And he's like, well, we're trying to keep this relationship, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, there's the problem right there. If you are supposed to protect the people that is in your name, and you are taking the cues from this multi-billion-dollar corporation who is essentially at the bare minimum the responsible party for what is going on, that is part of the hugest part of the problem,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to put a link down below to that recording to your site. Now, you've got a fundraiser that you're doing, so tell us about that. What can people do to help the people in East Palestine? What do they need, and what is this fundraiser about?
Yeah, so in July, I made July and September, I made two trips with mutual aid. We brought like diapers and pallets of water and groceries and clothing and things that the residents requested, that they were in need of. And this time the residents have asked me for gift cards. Since it is a rural area, pretty much Walmart is what it is. So what I'm hoping to do, and I know it's an ask, a big ask, but what I'm hoping to do is give 80 families $100 gift cards. So I put the amount at 8,000 in July, much of, because of being on Kim's show. We raised about 8,000 and change. That made us able for me to go down there twice. So thank you, Kim. You know, I can never thank you enough for that. Your viewers were just incredible. So yeah, we're looking for 8,000 again this time. I think we have like 1,700 right now. But that's the goal, to give families $100 gift cards so they can get what they need. They still need nonstop cases of water, diapers, and things like that. And like I said, they're not working either, and they lose any sense of anything that they even had hoped to be reimbursed for. February.
Wow. Okay. So this is to help specifically people who've had medical issues and have not been able to work, people who have had to spend just extra money, even if they're back to work, even if they're living in their homes, they're spending a bunch of extra money trying to buy cases of water in order to cook
Right.
and clean with that rather than using the tap water. So these are the unexpected expenses that people have had to
Right.
incur because of this disaster, and you're trying to help kind of mitigate that so that they're not as stressed.
Right.
All right. We're going to
Exactly.
put that link also to that fundraiser down below so people can definitely help donate to the cause and hopefully, just not forget about the people in East Palestine who are still suffering from this. And, good luck to the legal team and Aaron Brockovich and whoever's involved to kind of to figure out who is responsible for this and what sort of remedy these people should. I mean, this is not something that these people asked for. It was big companies trying to transport stuff around, making a lot of money. And you're right, they have a lot of money and they have the ability to help these people out, but a lot of times companies, they don't bake into their cost this type of disaster,
Right.
and they should be baking that in and thinking these things happen, and when they do, we should try to prevent them as much as possible. You want to
Right.
mitigate, but if you
And
can't, then you at least have to set aside funds in order to help the people in those stress situations.
right, and they have the funds, because $25 million for a park, they could buy every
Right,
single
right.
person's house, like
Yeah,
every person.
exactly. Yeah,
Um,
like, we don't need a park, like, don't give us $25 million park,
right, right.
something
It's
else, but
crazy. But
interesting.
and
Well,
I
and it sounds to me like they did that because they don't want people building on that area, right? They probably were like,
yes,
"Okay, let's put a park here so that we can ensure no one builds here and then comes after us later," and so it's kind of saving their own skin. I mean, usually they don't do things for the people, it's more about themselves as a
right,
company,
right.
right?
If they didn't, it's acknowledging we messed up,
Yeah,
because if we just give the money for the homes for these people, we're acknowledging it's our fault.
yeah,
But also a big shout out to Government Accountability Project. They're known for working with Snowden and people like that. They are on the case and they are doing incredible work with whistleblowers. So we are really hoping that we can bust some of these people.
great, great. Joy Marie Mann, thank you so much for joining us. Check Joy Marie Mann out on her show, Savage Joy, her YouTube show. That link is down below. Excellent work. You've been an organizer, an activist, a journalist, doing great work. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so, so much for your help and for having me back on.
All right, guys, that is it for today's show. Thank you so much for joining us. We do have all the links down below for the fundraiser for East Palestine, so be sure to check that out. Really appreciate all the help that you can give. And we will be back tomorrow with another great show. We're going to be here. We're changing the time again. I know, just 1 hour change, 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. I think it's going to work better. So we're just going to change it by 1 hour just to give us a little bit more time for production, just one extra hour. So that's 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern is the new show time. Sorry to be all crazy on you with these time changes, but we're just trying to find the right spot. I think this will be it. I hope, but we'll see. It might change my mind, but we will see you tomorrow at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. Thanks, guys, for watching. Have a great one. Bye bye.